Ahoy and welcome to Titanic Talkline. I am Alexia and I'm excited this week. Oh my God. It's not normally this early in an episode where the dogs start interrupting me, but like I can't stop them. But this week's guest is Ifan Fleming. We've been talking back and forth for a little while. I had to reschedule a few times on him. I'm so sorry because I had some like migraines and stuff going on, but it is finally worked out and he is here today. Hello, how are you?
Hello, it's nice to be on here, and don't worry about rescheduling because it's a bit hectic with life and everything.
That's
But I'm
true.
here.
Where are you in the world?
Uh, I'm in North Wales.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with Wales, but I'm on the bit sticking out. On on a good day, I can see Ireland from my house. So, um,
That's pretty cool.
but today's not a good day. It's foggy, misty, and windy and rain. So I think the summer's over here.
I'll trade you. It's been in record-breakingly hot here in Texas every day. I don't know Celsius very well. But that's a lie. I don't know Celsius at all, but if you understand Fahrenheit, it's been over 100 every day
Okay.
out here. It's gross. It's awful. So I would happily trade it for a rainy, misty Wales day. It would be a nice change. So when I have people on the show, I always ask them the same first question because it's a good intro question just to get things started. So I always ask everyone, what is their Titanic story? So Ivan, what is your Titanic story? How did you get brought into this?
Well, my interest in the Titanic started mainly with a film.
Hmm.
But my interest in ships generally began way before that
Hmm.
because my great grandmother, yes, was a passenger on the Lusitania twice.
Wow.
Um, because my great grandfather went over to Wisconsin in uh, red granite to work in the quarries, and he got interned in Ellis Island, and he didn't want my grandmother to go through that, so he saved up and worked for a year in red granite and paid and sent money back um, for my grandmother to sail second class on the Lusitania to join him.
Hmm.
And but unfortunately, um, in 1911 they lost their first child out there to something quite minor. So when my great grandmother found out she was pregnant again with my grandfather, she decided to come back to Wales to have the child with the premise of going back.
Hmm.
But obviously, the war um, started, and by the time the war ended, my grandfather was too well, too old to be relocated, put it like that.
That's fair. That's cool. Excuse me. That you have a connection to a ship like that. I don't obviously the show being called Titanic Talkline, I talk a lot about the Titanic. Duh.
Mm.
But I did an episode a little while ago with Tad Fitch, Ket Layton, and it was Bill Wormstead, I believe, was or was it Tom Linsky? I don't remember. There was a lot of people on that call, and I it was the discussion of the Lusitania disaster because it gets overshadowed by, things like Titanic, but it's interesting to hear, this is going to sound weird, but it's interesting to hear mundane stories of crossings. Like your grandmother crossed Lusitania twice and nothing happened to her. It's cool to hear that kind of story where it's like I was on this iconic thing, but I'm here.
Yeah. Yes.
It's fine. It was fine.
Yes, and coming coming at it from a dual perspective, I think the war overshadowed the Lusitania,
Hmm.
um, because I've done a lot of research to the Lusitania side as well. Not that they not that the Lusitania is irrelevant by any means to get swallowed up in the whole war war losses. And Titanic was more of an end of an era type event, if you will.
Hmm.
Mm.
I, I, they're different events. I think there's this need sometimes for people to like rank things almost, where we have to put things in perspective by comparing them to other things. It's a natural human tendency, but I unfortunately think it gets a little dangerous sometimes because you start reducing things down to numbers, and that sort of thing where it's like, oh, well, this disaster was worse than the other one because more people died, et cetera, which almost trivializes how individual experiences really contribute. I don't really think I know where I'm going with this statement, but I think where I'm trying to go with this is that comparing things is not good, and too many people do that, especially with things like shipwrecks like this, where you do have so much historical knowledge about, the specific numbers. It's easy to just look at numbers and run a comparison. But like I said, I think that personally gets a little dangerous because it boils it down to a not human story at that point.
Yes, yes, I agree with you, and uh, I've been I've been researching my own stuff for about 10 years now. A friend of mine said that she wanted to fill a slot in a local museum, and they did a series of local talks. So she said, "Oh, why don't you come to us and talk about the Welsh connection with the Titanic and the Lusitania?" And then I started off with the Titanic, and I thought because of the film that it's a relatively easy subject, if you will. But I'm still at it 10 years on, and they're still coming out of the woodwork somewhere. And it's honestly, it's taken me to places I would never even imagine going.
I think that's an interesting point. It's really funny. You made me think of two things, and I forgot the first one immediately in favor of the second one. But the second one was going to be taking you places that you never thought. And, it's been a little over a year since I started this show. And, when I first started the show, I was living in Maryland. I talk very openly about it. I was living in a basement apartment in Maryland with just my dog. And, since then, I've gone to Tennessee, I've gone to Houston, I've gone to Vegas, specifically for Titanic related things. I've gone back to Tennessee a couple more times. I've met new people. And it's fascinating how going into the past expands your interests and your network in that way.
Yes, it does because um, one interesting connection I found with the Titanic was there was an able seaman on the Titanic called John Anderson.
Mhm.
He was 40 years old on the Titanic, and he lived. He was originally from Newcastle, and then he moved to Southampton to board the Titanic. And I can hear you saying to me, what does this have to do in any way with Wales? Well, um, when the when he came back, he apparently lost all memory of who he was
Wow.
and where he was heading to, and he ended up in Cardiff. I found this by chance in an old newspaper, and the local constabulary in Cardiff arrested him and threw him into the poorhouse, which was um, doubling up as an asylum. Not a very nice place to be. And then he managed in 19 he got there in 1913 after being off the radar for quite some time.
Hmm.
And then in 1914 he escaped, and they found him. Well, I thought the end of the story was that they found him in the docks
Hmm.
and that he drowned. But when they took him back to the morgue, he he apparently was alive,
Oh.
and um and I don't know quite how this happened, but the Western Mail at the time said that they did a dreadful error in pronouncing that he was dead, and that he
Sorry.
was found swimming about. Um, oh, are you okay?
That's just so funny. It's like you're not dead. You're swimming around like a kid. Like what?
Yes, and then I this this person piqued my interest, and I got asking around to see if I could find where he ended up, and he ended up eventually back in Southampton, but he was in an asylum all his life, and apparently he couldn't settle at night, so that's why. Um, and I got interested to see how the humans you hear about losses and the loss, but you don't hear about much of the suffering afterwards, except perhaps in Lightoll's memoirs, where he says that he couldn't take cold baths,
Hmm.
and apparent. Um, I'm not surprised that he John Anderson lost his memory um, straight after the disaster. Um, so I've been chasing um, stories like that about really.
I think those stories are important. I've been very fortunate to be able to talk to a variety of people who have pursued different stories. And some of them are relatives, excuse me, of Titanic survivors or their relatives of Titanic victims. Sorry, I'm having a hard time with my words today. I apologize. And I've learned about so many stories that I didn't know about. Everyone knows the big names. We know Astor, we know Ismay, we know Smith, we know Lightoller, but not everyone knows Anderson or Paracchio or Fleet. You know,
No.
yeah, and there's so many more stories to the Titanic, and to everything than we know about. I mean, I had heard the name John Anderson, but I'd never really looked into his story. So it just goes to show you that every individual person, every single one of those 2,200 people was a person and had a life, a whole life before, and some of them after.
Mhm.
Eh,
And um
excuse me.
and I've decided to um carry on what I'm doing, researching it from a Welsh perspective, if you like, because another problem you have um in that period was that everyone um identified as British on board ships like that. And when and the Welsh on the Titanic are a very different. So, well, I think I tell a lie. I
How dare
think
you?
Harold Lowe identified as a Welsh British, but he didn't identify uniquely as Welsh. You know what I mean?
I do actually, and I don't understand the specifics of it maybe, but I understand the sentiment of it.
Mm.
Because I mean, I'm sure the case is true in Britain, but there have been periods of time here in the United States where certain identities were more dangerous than others. So for some, it was safer to not to say, for example, if you could pass, be like, I'm not native. I'm just white, whatever the case may be. For some people, it was easier. Is that the same thing, or was this very different?
Um, well, it's kind of the same, but without boring you with too many political history
I mean, explain
aspects.
it a bit. It's important, and I don't understand it. So,
Well,
excuse me.
the Welsh people had their own king back in 1282, and then the Saxon king didn't like that very much, so
Hmm.
he chopped his head off and displayed it in the Tower of London,
Excellent.
and then decided that he would conquer Wales. And ever since that period, really, Welsh has been seen as a secondary language and culture up until quite recently, really. Um, but it is getting better. We have our own Welsh Assembly government now, which is devolved. Um, we're still part of the UK, obviously, but we get our own. We get to make our own decisions, and It's kind of the situation in Ireland, but we've kept the language and the culture alive rather than the sentiment they have in Ireland, if you know what I mean.
Not really, but I feel like that maybe is a joke for not Americans.
Yeah.
I it that's really interesting, and I wanted to learn about that because so a while ago I read the book and then I was really lucky I got to talk to Stephen Beale and his book is called Jesus, Down with the Old Canoe. And it's less about the Titanic and more about the history of America and the UK at the time to help you understand how the disaster impacted everyone. And it was really fascinating to read because number one, I had a lot of knowledge gaps. I don't I really was not the best student of history when I was younger. So to this day now, oh my God, I don't know if I've told the story on the show yet, but my dad was quizzing me. My dad's a professor, so growing up, I would have like extra homework, and he would always just like throw questions at me at the dinner table. And I was having a particularly bad day, so I was getting frustrated. I think I was about 12 or so at this time, and I was getting annoyed with the questions and was getting overwhelmed and getting frustrated. And he throws at me, "What is the capital of England?" And that seems like a really obvious answer, right? But my brain short
Mm.
circuited and I just yelled back instantly. It's like Norway. So that's a joke now. Whenever I don't know where we're going, I don't know what we're talking about. They're like, "Is it in Norway?" But uh, all that to say, it's just when you understand the history around things, it makes things make more sense. Like if you understand that there was a coal strike around the time of Titanic, things like the officers shuffling around and vacancies on the ship make a lot more sense.
Yeah. Yes. And and another Welsh connection I found very interesting was, and it's again, this person was never on the Titanic, but he was a he was an amateur radio person on, and he lived in the south of Wales, in a village called Blackwood, and he lived in a mill, and he was a he had a mining accident when he was younger, and they had to amputate his leg, and that made made his interest in science a bit more because he was an amateur cyclist,
Mhm.
and then he decided, I'm not having the fact that I've only got one leg stop me from riding a bike. So he invented a bike for himself. So he was an amateur inventor, which, and he dabbled um in radiography. Anyway, he
That's
was
incredible.
sitting in his mill late at night, and he heard Titanic's distress call, which is 3,000 miles away from where he was. So he cycled to the local constabulary on his bike, and then because he was a bit of an eccentric, dabbling in all these inventions, he was a bit like, I'd imagine, the Caractacus Potts of his day, if you know about Chitty Bang Bang. And then the police said, "Oh yes, just go back to bed and don't worry about it, and just it'll all be fine. Everybody's going to be fine." But then the story obviously came through a few days later, and then he got a call from Marconi himself to go and work for him in London. So, so from every tragedy, a good thing happens, and his name was Artie Moore. And I've been to the mill where he heard the distress call.
Mm-hmm.
Switched my phone on, my mobile phone on. You can't get a signal there now. And to think that in 1912 he heard something from 3,000 miles away was a bit sobering, to be honest.
It's incredible. Sorry, I didn't mean to croak like that. I'm just, you hear these incredible stories of invention and technology and perseverance and determination, and the looping it back to Titanic, the famous story of Marconi operator Phillips staying at his post until he'd passed, trying to send out distress calls. You hear these incredible stories of human nature, a man who loses his leg but decides he's going to ride a bike, and an amateur inventor who decides he's going to investigate a call from 3,000 miles away because he feels obligated to. It's just these are incredible stories.
Yes, and he was an incredible man by all accounts, but because he was a bit quirky, let's put it like that. Nobody believed him, and when you think about what happened, who would believe him really? Because it was a new toy, if you will, and nobody really knew the capabilities of the radio at that time. But it just proves that the radio capability of the Titanic was a lot further than they originally thought. And I'm very proud that Wales played a small part in that, but a part that nobody quite knows the story yet.
Well, I hope more people will know now. We find out these stories by telling them, which is pretty cool, I think. I'm a little disappointed that it's always one of those things when I learn about something cool. It's like, why didn't I know about that before? But that's what this is for. It's for learning.
Yes. And I've honestly found a ton of amazing stories about both Titanic and the Lusitania, to be honest. And when I started researching the Welsh connection to the Lusitania, I found that there's stories which are mostly carbon copies of the stories on the Titanic. For example, the story of Fifth Officer Law going back to help people
Mm-hmm.
on the Titanic is mirrored by the third officer on the Lusitania, who was also a Welshman.
Hmm.
And he decided he was put in charge of releasing the lifeboats, and because I'm mixing up my ships now.
Me too. I
Because
do it all the
the
time.
because the Lusitania sank so quick, he was washed off um in the middle of doing his duty. Not only he decided that he would swim back onto onto the Lusitania to finish his job, even though the ship was going down, and that to me, I I know these people are probably looking down at us now and going, "Why the hell do these people bother with little old me?" But I think they're important stories to put out there because when you think about what they faced on both the ships, it's quite remarkable what they've done.
It's You mentioned earlier about how we don't talk about certain stories and we don't acknowledge certain stories because they have a lot of like suffering included in them. I'm kind of It makes me happy that we're in a place now that we are able to amplify these stories because as you said, they are important and it is important to keep these memories alive. I've brought up the movie. Have you seen the movie Coco?
Yes.
Yeah. I brought that up on the show a couple times because they talk about that concept of the second death. If anyone hasn't seen it and hasn't listened to the previous episodes, in the Land of the Dead, the character of Hector explains to Miguel that in the Land of the Dead, there's something called the second death, and that is when people in the land of the living basically forget about you, when no one's alive to tell your story. So, the last person that remembers you in life is gone. And excuse me, it helps prolong that sort of second death for people to continue to tell their stories.
Mm. Yes, and what um it this may sound a bit crass to what you refer to as rivet heads, but but without the people on the Titanic, you would you the Titanic is pointless
Mm-hmm.
in my view.
Agree.
Even though even though she's a nice thing to look at,
Mm-hmm.
without the people on board, you wouldn't have a story. And what intrigues me is why they were on there and what were they doing, and and did they get a better life? And going back to my grandmother situation,
Mm-hmm.
they did have a better life in America financially because they managed to buy their house back here with the money in their pocket, which was quite a substantial sum
Wow.
at the time. But when you counterbalance that with the loss they had of a loss of a child,
Mm-hmm.
was do you know what I mean?
Yes,
It's
I do.
it's never you get the feeling the grass is always greener,
Mm-hmm.
but it's never the case in my view. Um, and I completely forgot what I was going to say now.
That's fine.
but, but there we go. And um, the stories I found in newspapers uh, and stuff like that are quite remarkable. And when you see a picture of the people in print and you've never seen their face before, it sort of hits you. And if that person has died and you've never, and because I've been researching all day for a project I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
now, and I've I've found a picture of an Annie Williams from Swansea,
Mm-hmm.
and I've and she wasn't a remarkable woman. Like she was a granny on the Lusitania going home to visit to visit her family in Swansea, and she perished. And they published a picture of her in the newspaper. And even though I've got no um, blood relation to this woman, seeing her with her little spectacles and uh, like your typical wartime granny, if you will, sort of hit you. And I don't know why, and I don't know why that got me a bit.
No, I understand. When I went to the um Titanic exhibit in Las Vegas, one of my favorite things there was this little like tea cup, but it looks like something that I could buy in a shop today. It's white, has painted flowers on it. It looks like something that you'd find in like some trendy art market when you're out after brunch or something. And you look at it and think like, who bought that? Who owned that? That wasn't White Star Line. That belonged to a human being. Whose
Mm,
was that? Who were you? Where were you? Why were you on here? And it leads all these almost childlike questions where it's like, why? What were you doing? Why did you buy that? Where did it come? Well, what are you doing? Why are you going to America? Are you going to get married? Do you have a job? They're these innocent questions, but this one little thing can trigger all of that curiosity.
mm. And it's a microcosm of a society within 882 feet of steel. If you boil it down to um, the essentials of the story, and that's what to me is very interesting. Um, yes, and I think um, James Cameron's 97 movie has helped to breathe new life into the into the Titanic disaster, if you because when I was growing up, and purely because of my family connection, it wasn't cool or trendy to look into this sort of history, but I think it's absolutely fascinating, and you never know where you're gonna end up um, with with any sort of question you may have about the Titanic. You think you know the answer, but you never do.
True. You never do.
No,
You're
which is a bit awkward and annoying sometimes.
I mean, I guess, but I think that's also one of the not great, but like one of the big challenges of looking into anything to do with the past is that there's so many different mysteries that you will never ever be able to solve because who knows?
Mm,
Everything is so
yeah.
far away.
Mm. And uh, yeah, so that's my um Titanic interest, and I'm still plugging away at well, I call it my little corner of research, but it's there for everyone to find if they want to. But
That's
I've decided to do it now.
yeah. What are you currently working on? You said you're working on a different project.
Um, well, I'm I recently um put a request in to do a PhD
Hmm.
on the Welsh connections, specifically to the Lusitania, because I think that area is under researched, and
Hmm.
especially with the lack of Welsh material uh, regarding the. So I'm waiting to hear um, what's becoming of that, but I've decided that I'm gonna do the research anyway,
Why
and
not?
it was just it was just a medium for me to um get my all my papers in order,
Hmm.
because I think it's a great shame that what I have is locked up in a drawer somewhere, and I don't really quite know what to do with it. So I'm hoping that if I get accepted on this thing, that it'll become more structured.
I really hope that happens for you. When will you find out? That's the question I'm trying to ask. When will you find out?
Well, I've put a request in to start next January,
Wow.
so I'm hoping before next January.
Well, fingers crossed, man. I hope that works out. That would be amazing. I would love to see what you could do if you got, you were able to put all that together. I know that there's a lot of structure involved with PhD programs, so sometimes that's good when you're trying to like get something done.
Yes, yes, because my it started off with mum saying you've got too many ship papers, do something
Yeah.
with them. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. It's
I,
just,
I think that your current strategy of putting them in a drawer and locking the drawer is a is a great strategy for the meantime.
yes, but not not that I want to keep things to myself. It's just I want to share it with people, but um I'll share one story
Yeah.
where I got my fingers a bit burnt, to be honest. Again, um, going back to the Lusitania, I found out there was a person on the Lusitania, and nobody knows his name,
Mhm.
and he was buried in a plot in Cardiff because his body was brought back to Barry Docks, south of Cardiff, and because nobody, it was one of two bodies recovered, and one got recovered because she was a first class passenger and they could identify her from her diamonds. And ironically, when she was shipped, not shipped, she was transported back to America, that ship got torpedoed too. So she got torpedoed twice. Um,
I don't think you
but
should ever go near the water again if that happens. I think that that's just the universe telling you stay on dry land. I'm not saying that for everyone, but if you get torpedoed twice, I just don't think you should leave a continent. You should just pick one and stay.
no, and um, I found I found out where this unknown sailor was buried, and uh, the person in the cemetery thought I must have thought I was nuts because he was on a computer and said, "Have you got a name?" No. Well, how can I help you? And well, I need to find where this body is buried. It's here somewhere, and it was a huge, huge cemetery. So, well, unless you've got anything concrete, I can't help you. So I went back to my the schedule they released with the last passenger list, and I got a date of burial, and I said to him, "Can you do something with the date of burial?"
Mhm.
So he went to the computer and said, "Well, there's a Mister, and his name was Mister Ew No,
All
because
right.
they yeah." And they found the plot, and there was no gravestone on it. And then uh, I uh, I petitioned the local council to get a grave on to get a stone on the grave. Sorry, and by now the gravestone's there, but they didn't involve me with anything, so like the unveiling of the grave or anything, even though I told them I'd like to be there because um because without not being selfish, without me, they wouldn't they wouldn't have known he was there.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah,
Well, I'm sure that even if they're being like that, I'm sure they were grateful for the tip.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
But
excuse me.
the the most important thing that there's a stone on the grave now, and
Exactly.
um, if I don't know if you would like to see some artifacts I've got from my grandmother. Well, my great grandmother, um,
Sure.
which was on the Titanic, on the Lusitania. I'm
Lusitania.
mixing up my ships again.
That's okay.
uh,
Titanic's only 100 feet longer than the Lusitania.
yes, this is her rolling pin, which she
Wow.
carried, with her from her house in the village I live in
She
to
took her
Red
baking
Rapid.
seriously then.
Yes, and back, and I've got a little souvenir she bought on board. I don't know if you can see
I can
that.
see if I'm gonna ask Ifan to send me photos, but it's a very cute little china plate with it looks like china lace on the outside. On the inside is a painted picture of the Lusitania. It's very nice.
Yes. So it's in my cabinet now in the lock and key again. Um, and honestly, my house is like a museum. So uh,
That's really incredible. And I think that with you is the best place for them to be. They're your family's history.
so I'll send you a picture of both of those
That would
if
be
you
amazing.
if you'd like them.
That would be awesome. I'm sure everyone would like to see those. And I want to thank you for your time and for telling your story and helping to tell so many other people's stories, Ifan. Thank you so much for your time today and for your patience in my life being a mess.
It's okay, and thank you very much, and keep up the good work for the podcasts.
Well, thank you. I'll try.